The 20-hour trek from Singapore to O'Hare International, with a layover in Taipei, was grueling, even in business class. It was barely an upgrade from economy class, often likened to a cattle car. Celebrating my birthday mid-flight didn't bring much cheer, and the impending meeting with the head of our international stocks and shares trading desk in Chicago loomed large in my mind. We touched down a bit past 8:30 a.m., and I hopped on a shuttle to the Chicago hotel. Having booked the room the night before, it was ready for me upon arrival. I dumped my bags, took a quick shower, and made a beeline for the gym. I spent half an hour lifting weights, followed by another half hour on the treadmill. Another shower followed where I stood under the hot jets for a full 15 minutes before switching to cold water until I was nearly frozen. Chicago in April isn't warm by any stretch, but I endured the chill until my teeth chattered, then turned the hot water back on for 5 minutes to warm up. It was the closest I could get to feeling fully awake. Next, I headed to the hotel restaurant for an American breakfast I'd missed during my 4 months abroad. Pancakes, scrambled eggs, bacon, and sausage, drenched in maple syrup, washed down with 4 cups of coffee, fortified me for the day ahead. I then made my way to J.P. Morgan for my 10:30 appointment. Riding the elevator to the 8th floor, where the private banking suites were located, I presented my ID in the lobby. From there, I was shown to a small conference room and asked to wait. Clearly, they intended to keep me on edge. The room had 2 cameras in opposite corners, undoubtedly monitoring me. I tossed my leather briefcase and laptop onto the polished table and stood by the window, staring out at the street without moving. They left me there for over 17 minutes. I counted to 1,120 Mississippi without flinching. My frequent trips to the Far East and Southeast Asia had taught me to maintain a stoic demeanor and never show weakness. John Stewart, Vice President of International Stock and Commodities Traders, finally entered, followed by Christopher Turner, our corporate lawyer. If it had been just John, we would have brainstormed ways to fix the issue and stop the bleeding. If it had been just Christopher, it would have been about covering the bank's legal bases. But with both of them present, it was clear that someone was getting fired, and that someone was me. "Matthew," John greeted me without a handshake, motioning for me to sit. They positioned themselves across from me, drawing the battle lines. "What the hell happened in Singapore?" he demanded, his tone making it clear it wasn't really a question. "We sent you there to stabilize the team, but you approved a $300 million stock purchase in a new company listed on the Singapore Stock Exchange, based on scant data, and their assurance it was a good idea. Yes?" "Yes," I affirmed. "Yes what?" John's face flushed purple, a vein bulging on his forehead. "Explain yourself." "Look, John, it's all detailed in my report. The COO prospect was top-notch. Their management team has nearly 200 years of combined experience. The project itself has been in development for 50 years, with numbers verified by Deloitte and KPMG. Given the overfishing of the oceans, their aquaculture project is among the most technologically advanced worldwide, supported by genuine expertise and capability." "Then why is their share price plummeting?" John shouted. "They launched at $17 a share, and now they're down to $9.55. He jabbed his finger on the table. "And you bought more?" "Yes, because there's going to be a rebound. If the price hits $25 as my team forecasts, we'll have shares at both $17 and $9.55. That's a potential profit of $267 million, almost 90%. John didn't see the broader picture. "We own 25% of the shares, making us the largest shareholder," I explained. "In a failing company," John yelled, spittle flying. "That's due to the Chinese, and to a lesser extent the Taiwanese and Vietnamese, short-selling to sink the company. It's direct competition with their fisheries, threatening their near monopolies in Southeast Asia. Alternatively, they aim to buy it for next to nothing and expand their stake in the global fish trade. We need the courage to hold our ground." "It's just a failure," John shook his head. "This isn't the wild 80s and 90s. We need to trade on confidence and maintain a positive risk ratio." "It's all in my report," I reiterated, pointing it out again. "Your report is just 50 pages of wishful thinking," John accused. "Anyway, it's not just my decision now. The council has approved my recommendation and you're out." Christopher then stepped in with the offer: 3 months' salary and nearly 30 days of accrued vacation, effectively giving me almost 5 months of pay. They would also cash in my stock options and pay the difference between the issue price and the current price. In total, I would walk away with nearly $800,000, but my reputation would be in tatters, and my job prospects bleak, unless I wanted to flip burgers at McDonald's or fry chicken at KFC. By 2 o'clock, I had signed all the necessary forms, rolled my 17-year-old 401(k) into an IRA, turned in all company materials, including my laptop, and was escorted out. Standing on the sidewalk with an empty satchel slung over my shoulder, I felt a strange pressure in my head, like a brain aneurysm. I quickly hailed a cab back to the hotel, my mind conjuring images of me collapsing in the street, strangers gawking at my demise. Once back in my room, I grabbed a whiskey mini from the bar, mixed it with 7-Up, and poured it over ice. Blasphemy, I know. I sat down to ponder my next steps. At 42, I was too young to retire but too old to start over. There was only one option left, a gamble. But could I muster the courage? I resolved that if I couldn't find the courage, how could I expect others to? Feeling the need to clear my head, I went out shopping. An hour later, I returned with a new laptop, pre-installed with Windows 11. After downloading the necessary programs to track purchases and sales, I got straight to work. I plugged in a flash drive containing all my Singapore transactions, which I had wisely left in my hotel room to keep them secure. I checked our savings account and saw $50,000. My investment accounts each had $250,000, but accessing those funds required a 24-hour notice. I initiated the notice, sold some of my blue-chip stocks, and calculated that combined with my salary and option payments, I would have over $2 million available soon. The funds were due in the next 2 days, so I transferred almost everything into an offshore trading account named Blue Sky International. By the time I finished, it was already 9 p.m. I ordered a hamburger and a beer from room service, then pulled out my phone, which had been off for more than 36 hours. I considered turning it on, but was too mentally drained to deal with the barrage of messages I expected, so I left it off and turned my attention to the TV, switching channels to catch up on the news and world markets. With a belly full of whiskey, beer, and a hamburger, I eventually succumbed to jet lag and passed out. The next morning, I woke up early, still adjusting to the time difference. I sipped my coffee and finally turned on my phone. It exploded with messages. "Help, Dad! Mom is having a breakdown," read one from Liam and Megan. The message was longer, but that was the gist. Another from my dad asked, "What's going on with Alice?" There were birthday wishes from Alice's parents. "Happy birthday, and why aren't you answering your phone?" From my own parents, "Happy birthday, son, and happy birthday, little brother," from my sister Madeline. More birthday greetings came from Liam and Kathy, and a "good luck, Matthew" from Team Singapore. Liam followed up with more calls, saying Mom had been sad and crying but had calmed down. Not a single call or message from Alice. No birthday greetings, no explanations. It was like I didn't exist to her. I took the 8:30 flight to Springfield, called home, and was greeted by chaos. The living room was littered with the kids' games, soda cans, and plates. The floors looked like they hadn't been vacuumed in weeks. The kitchen was worse. The sink was clogged with dirty dishes, the dishwasher was overflowing, and the trash can was full. I took everything to the laundry room, where piles of unwashed clothes waited. I sorted the whites and lights from the darks and started the laundry. Back in the house, I began tidying up the living room and kitchen. I found 2 empty wine bottles and glasses with different lipstick marks in the living room. Our bedroom looked neglected, so I changed the sheets, replaced the duvet cover, and aired out the room. The kids' rooms were less messy, but still needed cleaning. I vacuumed the floors and emptied the trash cans. 3 hours later, I felt somewhat in control and headed to my office to check on my laptop. The first thing I did was check the Southeast Asia aquaculture stock. It had dropped to $9.30, nearly 2 points down for the day. I would soon see how brave I was once my money was in the market. I called my dad. My mom had died 5 years ago from breast cancer. We talked about Alice. He said she had seemed sad and depressed for the past 2 weeks, heartbroken for no clear reason. It was strange. I checked our bank transactions but found nothing unusual. Things just kept getting weirder. I checked the home phone messages, but there was nothing unexpected. After drying and folding the laundry, I looked through the fridge for dinner options. There was hardly anything. I went into the garage, reconnected the battery to my Audi A6, and started it up on the first try. I drove to the local supermarket, bought essentials, and came back with groceries to make Thai green curry and jasmine rice. I cooked the rice with water and coconut milk, adding a bit of ginger for extra flavor. I stir-fried chicken strips with zucchini, Asian eggplant, chopped lemongrass, fresh minced garlic, Asian basil, fresh cilantro, and green chilies. I added a can and a half of coconut milk, 2 tablespoons of green curry paste, the zest and juice of 2 limes, a tablespoon of fish sauce, and a teaspoon of sugar to balance the flavors. I let it boil, and then chopped 4 spring onions, fresh coriander, and basil leaves for garnish. I set the table and poured myself a beer. Halfway through my beer, Alice's car pulled into the driveway. The kids, seeing my car, ran into the house screaming, "Daddy's home!" I hugged them tightly, kissed them repeatedly, and told them how much I missed them despite our frequent Skype calls. Tears welled up in my eyes, and Megan sobbed in my arms, clinging to me. Liam was more reserved, trying to act grown up. We stayed like that for a long time. When I looked up, I saw Alice watching us with a strange, almost wistful expression, and tears rolling down her cheeks. She waited until I stood up, still holding our children, then pulled me close and kissed me gently on the lips. "Welcome home, Matthew," she said, but there was no enthusiasm in her voice. Her body language showed sadness or discomfort, and her eyes didn't linger on me for long. "That smells nice," she sniffed. "What is it?" "It's Thai green curry," I replied. Liam and Megan looked at me, confused. "I don't know what it is, Dad, but it smells really good," Liam said, hugging me again. Kathy nodded and kissed me, her arms around my neck. "Go clean up and get ready for dinner," Alice ordered. "Hurry up. You'll have plenty of time with your father afterward." She came in and gave me a gentle hug and a kiss on the cheek. "You look exhausted, Matthew," Alice remarked, her eyes scanning my weary face. "How come you're back so soon? I thought you'd be there for another 8 weeks." "The bosses didn't appreciate some of my initiatives," I confessed. "I just got fired." She blushed deeply, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. "Oh, that's unfortunate," she stammered. "We'll figure something out, but what about you?" I studied her, this woman who seemed almost a stranger, despite our 15 years of marriage. She acted more like an acquaintance than my wife. "Are you okay?" I asked, noting a flicker of something in her eyes before she blinked and straightened up. "It's work." She attempted a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "The market's down." "That's not what I heard," I replied, my suspicion growing. "There are changes happening at M. There's a lot of pressure on everyone," she said, gesturing broadly to illustrate the magnitude. At that moment, the kids, having finished washing up, bounded down the stairs and rushed towards me. "We'll talk later," she said, turning to the kitchen. We gathered for dinner and I served and arranged each plate, pouring Alice and myself a cool California white wine. Liam opted for a can of Mountain Dew, while Kathy wanted water. Sitting down for a meal as a family for the first time in 4 months felt surreal. I shared stories about Singapore, recounting the lifestyle and team-building activities like dragon boat races, indoor golf, ninja tag, and combat archery. The kids were fascinated. After dinner, Liam and Kathy disappeared briefly, then returned with a wrapped present. "Happy birthday, Dad!" they shouted in unison. Alice's hands flew to her mouth in surprise. I kissed my children, their joy infectious. "Oh my God," Alice exclaimed. "I'm so sorry, Matthew, I totally forgot." I held back from reminding her about the gold diamond earrings I'd given her for her birthday, and instead focused on the kids. I opened the present, revealing a Brothers in Arms box set. I had always wanted the complete collection. I kissed them again, their wide smiles matching mine. "I'll get you a present tomorrow, Matthew," Alice said, looking both embarrassed and remorseful. "You don't have to," I replied generously. "Being home with my family is all the present I need." Liam and Megan threw themselves into my arms again, crying, "Love you, Daddy." We continued talking at the table for over an hour, but eventually the kids had to do their homework. Alice and I cleaned up the kitchen together. "What's going on with you, Alice? You're not the person I know," I said, concerned. She jerked her hand sharply, as if to silence me. Then her shoulders slumped. I don't know, Matthew. I guess I'm depressed. You've always traveled so much and for weeks at a time. This last trip was too long, she said, looking me in the eye. You're not here. We hardly live the same life. Tears streamed down her cheeks. I feel lost. I reached out and pulled her into a bear hug. She resisted initially, but then melted into my arms, sobbing softly. We stayed like that for a while. I wanted to solve the problem, but she seemed to want nothing more than to be held. She was right, though. Over the past 6 years, since my promotion to supervisor, I had become a problem solver for young, inexperienced teams. We had agreed to make sacrifices, aiming to retire when I turned 50 and enjoy a life of leisure and travel. She gently pulled away and suggested I spend some time with the kids. I started with Megan, helping her with her homework, then did the same with Liam. After tucking Megan into bed and kissing her goodnight, I walked over to Liam. "Mom's not okay, Dad," he said, worry etched on his face. "She's crying a lot and hardly doing anything around the house. She even forgot your birthday." He glanced at the door, making sure we weren't overheard. "I think she's having a nervous breakdown." Tears welled up in his eyes. "Please fix it, Dad." I nodded, despite having no clear idea of what was wrong or how to fix it. As I walked down the stairs, I heard Alice talking quietly on the phone. She noticed me and abruptly ended the call. "Who was that?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "One of the girls from the office," she replied, her tone defiant. We stared at each other, neither backing down. Whatever was troubling her, she wasn't ready to talk about it. She seemed angry, and she was trying to hide it. I realized the problem was more serious, but the jet lag was overwhelming me, and I still had so much to do. At 9:30 p.m., I went into my office and checked the Singapore Stock Exchange. They were 13 hours ahead, and trading had already been going for 2 hours. CA was trading at $9.90, a slight increase. I went upstairs and waited for Alice to finish in the bathroom. She washed her face, brushed her teeth and hair, and walked into the bedroom wearing an oversized t-shirt, as she often did. I cleaned myself up, brushed my teeth, rinsed off, and climbed into bed. I reached for her, and she tensed before relaxing against me. "Please just hold me," she whispered in a thin voice. I hugged her for a long time. This was not the woman I knew. Something was fundamentally wrong. Had I been away too long? Was the separation too hard? But she had never said anything, not once. Had she fallen out of love with me? Fallen in love with someone else? Had an affair? Then a terrible thought struck me. What if she was sick? What if it was a terrible disease, and she didn't know how to tell me? These thoughts swirled endlessly, but finally, the jet lag and the intense emotions of the last 2 days took their toll, and I fell into a deep sleep. I dreamt of chasing a nameless, shadowy figure but never catching it. I woke up at 4:30 a.m., I still feeling tired and sick. I decided to go for a run and promised myself to buy melatonin pills from the pharmacy to reset my circadian rhythms. I was on the road for about an hour. When I returned, Alice was gone, leaving a short note asking me to feed the kids breakfast and drive them to school. It was still early, so I checked my bank account. The money from JP Morgan had cleared, and I transferred it to my offshore account. I checked the CA shares and saw that they had not only lost their previous gains, but were now trading at $8.99. They weren't in a free fall, but it felt like they were on a downward escalator. I was faced with a difficult choice: fix my marriage or secure my financial future. Could I do both? I spent as much time as possible with Liam and Kathy, asking them about their activities during the months I was gone. They mentioned a few corporate events with my wife's boss, Nicholas Wright. They had played miniature golf, gone to the movies, and had dinner outings. Kathy didn't notice anything unusual, but Liam must have seen something in my face and quickly explained. "Dad, he was always with his daughter, Isabella. Mom said they were all like one big happy family." Megan nodded in agreement. "Yeah, Aunt Isabella was always with us," she added. I smiled at them and said I was glad they had enjoyed themselves while I was away. But now that I was back and summer was approaching, I wanted us to go on vacation and make the most of it. They nodded approvingly, and I hugged and kissed them again. After dropping them off at school, I called a few friends to arrange meetups and then contacted Charles Reed, my old mentor. He had been my manager when I first joined the trading floor and had taught me to recognize trends that no computer program could identify. "Everything is driven by greed and fear," he had always said. We talked for a while. He still lived in Chicago and ran a small brokerage firm for a few old clients. We discussed my accreditation, and I agreed to send him an electronic copy of the EA prospectus to review later that day. On my way to my first appointment, I stopped by the HHS Community Pharmacy across from St. John's Hospital to pick up some melatonin and vitamins. As I was leaving, I saw Alice and Isabella Wright coming out of the hospital. They were holding on to each other, looking like two women bound by shared grief. I discreetly watched as they walked, heads down, shoulders slumped, and got into an Uber that whisked them away into traffic. What the hell was that? I wondered, running through all the possibilities. Was my wife sick and hiding it from me? Was Isabella ill? They looked stricken with grief but not physically sick. Perhaps it was a mutual acquaintance. No, they seemed too emotionally attached. A lover, maybe. But who? Whatever it was, they shared a deep connection. I decided to do the rational thing and headed to my meeting. I discussed the possibility of investing in CA and left no detail out, including my recent firing. Sebastian Hayes said he would discuss it with his investment club and get back to me. My second meeting was with Ethan Silverman, an old-fashioned retailer with significant wealth. He liked the idea immediately, and after some time at his computer shifting funds, he agreed to transfer $10 million into my trading account after the paperwork was completed. While having coffee at Starbucks on Monroe, Charles called. He liked the prospectus and had a group of interested investors. We agreed on a sliding scale commission structure, with higher yields resulting in higher commission percentages. I then called my dad to discuss the CA opportunity. He wanted to invest $100,000 and would wire the money the next day. I then turned my attention to Alice's strange behavior. Her actions resembled those of a woman in mourning. But who could she be mourning? Her parents were healthy and living in Arizona, enjoying the warm climate. She had no siblings, and her cousins were scattered and nearly strangers. My dad, a risk analyst for a major insurance company, suggested I hire a private investigator. He recommended Leonard Cooper from Discrete Solutions, a PI they had used regularly for insurance fraud investigations. Returning home, I contacted my contacts in Singapore and Southeast Asia to get updates on the sentiment in the country and recreated the risk assessment profile for CA. The numbers remained rational, the management team was solid, and the project, though in its infancy, was backed by experienced professionals who had invested their own money into it. This strengthened my confidence in the project. With everything in place, I waited for the SSE to open to start trading. While waiting, I called Leonard Cooper. He had a slow southern accent which seemed intentional, masking a sharp and insightful mind. He asked for a $5,000 advance and, given my father's referrals, agreed to start the next day. With everything ready, I sat down with a cup of coffee, nervously waiting for the time to pass. My energy had peaked as Liam and Kathy came home late from sports practice. I spent as much time with them as I could, explaining that I had important business to attend to. Alice arrived looking tired but more resolute than the previous evening. "I picked up Chinese food on the way home," she announced, walking into my office and giving me a quick kiss on the cheek. "Are you working?" "Hi, Alice," I replied flatly. There was no warmth in her greeting, so I didn't offer any either. It felt like when I was a kid, wishing we could eat as a family, but knowing I had to work tonight. "From about 7, okay?" I added. "That's fine, I guess," she said uncertainly. "I have a present for your birthday." She handed me a small gift-wrapped package. The card read, "Happy birthday, Matthew. Love, Alice." I had sent more personalized cards to distant cousins and siblings. Inside was a bottle of Hugo Boss aftershave. I thanked her, and she leaned over to kiss my dry lips. It felt as impersonal as if we were distant relatives. We sat down to eat dinner as a family. Liam and Kathy talked about their day, while Alice said very little. We discussed some changes that had happened during my absence. Liam complained that the old skate park had closed, leaving fewer activities for teenagers. Kathy mentioned it was good that Mr. Wright, Alice's boss, had converted a house into a shelter for abused teens. I turned to Alice with a raised eyebrow. "I didn't know Wright was into that kind of thing," I said, genuinely surprised. "He is," Alice replied. "Tony wants to start a conservation project, and this is his way of doing it." Her explanation was vague, and I sensed she was withholding information. I'm surprised. I thought he was more of a country club guy, I remarked. His wife Lynn started it while she was alive, and he continued after she passed, Alice informed me, somewhat smugly. He often used his empty properties for it, but now he wants a permanent establishment. Why now? I asked, looking at her intently. There was something she wasn't saying. Her face became impassive, and something flashed in her eyes. Now the opportunity has presented itself, she said, nodding as if to confirm her own words. Sounds like a great idea. Springfield could definitely use it, I said, smiling at her. She smiled back, and we both got up to clean the rest of the food. I tried to keep a pleasant expression on my face, but inside, I felt she had lied to me. Maybe not about everything, but enough to make me uneasy. Her body language suggested she knew more, and that it was something personal. I helped clean up, took out the trash, and told her I was going to work in my office. There was still an hour before trading opened in Singapore. I sat down at my desk, thinking about my marriage, trying to keep my sanity and not let the deeply buried pain consume me. I realized that if I gave up now, I wouldn't be able to do what needed to be done. But holding back the pain would likely make it worse. How had we gotten to this point? Alice and I had been compatible in almost every way. We agreed on where to live, how to spend our money, how to vacation, when to have children, and how many. We had a good life. The last few years had been tough because of my traveling, but we usually planned mini honeymoons when I returned. This time, things were different. I thought we were on the same page, but clearly we weren't. It made me angry. In Singapore and South Asia, many women looked for non-Asian men, seeing them as a ticket to the West. I was hit on daily in the office, on the subway, at food markets, and especially in bars and clubs. Many of my coworkers dated local women. Some even kept them in their apartments as de facto servants with privileges. I found this practice disgusting and exploitative. The only reason I thought about it was that I turned down pretty women 10 times a week because I was married to a woman I loved and thought loved me back. Her behavior now made me question that belief. I wondered if there had been any warning signs, but apart from a near breakdown in communication over the past few weeks, I couldn't pinpoint anything. There was much to ponder, but right now, I had to focus on work. When the Singapore market opened, California was trading at $8.49. I proceeded cautiously and methodically. There were many sellers and few buyers, and any large purchase could cause unrest. I had over $30 million to play with. My contacts and Charles's were top-notch, trusting our expertise. God help us all. My first purchase was for $5 million from an unknown seller. Then an avalanche of stocks hit the market as worried investors tried to unload and salvage what they could. I suspected my old company was dumping shares at the urging of the head office. I kept buying in $5 million increments, expecting the price to stabilize, but it continued to fall. Someone was selling stock they didn't have, hoping to buy it back cheaper at the end of the day. The price continued to fall as panicked investors tried to get rid of their holdings, hoping for 25 or even 20 cents on the dollar. The price hit $5.61 when I made my last purchase of $15 million. With our $30 million, we had bought a little over 10% of the total shares listed, giving us the power to appoint someone to the board of directors. Since we owned a significant block of shares, we decided to hold on to them and make a profit. I called Charles, and we both had a drink over the phone, me with an 18-year-old J.P. Weiser's Canadian whiskey on the rocks, and Charles, being old school, with a 10-year-old Bullet bourbon. Our strategic purchases encouraged some cautious investors to jump in at the bargain price. By the time I logged off, the price had climbed to $8.72, leaving short sellers stranded and bleeding money. Rubbing my tired eyes, I noticed it was nearly 2 a.m. I cleaned up quickly and collapsed into bed, having forgotten the melatonin pills still in the car. The next morning, I woke up late to find everyone downstairs. Liam and Kathy were finishing breakfast while Alice was on the phone, saying something about time is of the essence. She saw me and ended the call. Work! She shrugged dramatically and handed me a cup of coffee. You must have been up late. I nodded, taking a sip. Did the trade go well? She asked. I mimicked her shrug and left without answering, heading to my office with a second cup of coffee. Checking the stock price at the close, I was pleased to see a late rally had pushed it to $10.40. Those holding the stock had to be thrilled, while the short sellers must have been devastated. It was time to stabilize the stock and start trading on its potential, free from the manipulative games of hostile entities. After washing my face, I began sending emails and making calls. First, I needed to catch up with our investment circle. I started with the Right Real Estate website, which had the usual corporate vision and mission statements and testimonials from satisfied clients. The site highlighted their social responsibility program, New Horizons House, aimed at helping troubled teens with housing, food, training, counseling, and assistance in finding jobs and finishing school. I found nothing new, so I turned to Facebook. Nicholas Wright's Facebook was filled with pictures of his cars, vacations, and social events. A recent group photo from a corporate event caught my eye. Nicholas stood in the center, with his daughter Isabella on his left and Alice on his right. He looked much older and more haggard, having lost a lot of weight. Alice was holding his hand and looking at him, not the camera. It might not have meant anything, but it stood out to me. Alice's Facebook was mostly old family photos, including some of us from happier times. Her posts were mundane and banal, holding little interest. The last picture of us together was over 2 years old. On Isabella's page, there were many photos with Alice over the past few years. Some included Nicholas, but nothing inappropriate, just evidence of their time spent together. The last few messages were cryptic, discussing the meaning of life and praying for positive outcomes. I had another conversation with Leonard Cooper. "Please call me Leonard, Matthew. I've worked with your father so long that I feel like I know you," he said. I expressed the need to expedite the investigation. He agreed but reminded me that thorough investigations take time. I then called my father. His advice was to avoid jumping to conclusions and forming theories. "Let the experts do their job," he said. "Give them time." His words left me in a dilemma. Should I confront Alice and try to fix our marriage? Wouldn't that lead to more heartache if I found out I had been played for a fool? On the other hand, if I did nothing and things could have been fixed, how devastated would I be for not trying? Seeking legal advice, I contacted a reputable lawyer's office in town. A staff member advised that it was better to fix the marriage than to divorce. "There are rarely winners in divorce," she said, "mostly only losers." I decided to reach out to a former colleague of Alice's who owed me a favor. He had left Right Real Estate about 6 or 7 months ago, but agreed to meet for a late lunch at Red Robin. Derek walked in wearing his usual realtor attire, golf shirt, chinos, and dockers, with sunglasses perched on his head. After exchanging pleasantries over burgers, I got to the point. Derek chuckled when he realized my intentions. "So you're fishing, Matthew?" I nodded. "I'm trying to understand something about MREs. Something came up that's been bothering me." Derek turned serious. "Everything changed when Tony lost his wife to cancer. He lost his drive for a long time. Then his daughter became the driving force, and over the next year or so, he seemed to find himself again. Your wife and he became very close. She was sometimes referred to as his office wife," he said, gauging my reaction. I gestured for him to continue, my throat too tight to speak. I didn't see anything inappropriate, but office gossip can be cruel. One thing is clear. Tony, Isabella, and your wife spent a lot of time together. But you weren't home often, were you? I shrugged helplessly. We talked a bit more, but nothing new came up. As Derek was about to leave, he suddenly remembered something. "Did you know Nicholas was rumored to have been diagnosed with cancer?" We said goodbye, but I stayed and called St. John's Hospital. I presumptuously asked which room Nicholas Wright was in and learned he was in a private room in the oncology ward. I paid for lunch and headed home, my mind racing with new information. That evening was much like the previous ones, except after cleaning up, I took a whiskey and a cigar outside. I sipped and puffed away in the quiet neighborhood. Alice came out with a glass of wine. "Can we talk, Matthew?" she asked. "Shoot. You went on the MRE website," she accused. I was surprised by her knowledge. "Apparently they're more advanced than I expected. I guess if they intercept visitor data, they can use it to make contact. And I want to know why." "Why what?" "Why did you go to the company's website? What do you expect to find?" "I assume you've also checked everyone's Facebook page," she said, glaring at me, daring me to say something to start an argument. We had been married long enough for me to recognize when something was off. "What did you expect to find?" Alice asked, her voice edged with irritation. "Exactly what I found," I replied, keeping my expression neutral. And what was that? She demanded. Why are you questioning me, Alice? I shot back. I'm not interrogating you. It feels like you're spying, she said, her tone accusatory. Social media pages aren't private, I laughed, but it only made her face flush with anger. Isabella said you also went on her Instagram, she accused, her voice shaking. Really? I replied, pretending to be surprised. Yes, she said, taking a deep breath as if to steady herself. Why are you acting like this? Like what? I asked, blowing smoke in her direction, knowing how much she hated it. She waved her hand to disperse the smoke, spilling some wine on her blouse in the process. Please stop, Matthew, she began to cry. Normally I would have comforted her, but this time I remained indifferent. Why are you crying, Alice? I asked coldly. Your behavior's upsetting me, Matthew, she growled, her voice louder now, trying to make her point clear. I just exhaled more smoke, creating a small cloud between us. Who are you? I asked her, genuinely confused by her behavior. She tried to respond but remained silent for a while. Finally, she said, I am your wife, Matthew Blake. That's who I am. I'm not sure, I replied, stepping back as she gasped and ran into the house. I finished my drink and went to my office to work. CA's stock was rising steadily, now at $11.92, and it looked like the trend would continue. Charles and I discussed it and agreed this was a genuine trend, not a temporary spike. I stayed online, monitoring the market activity. While blue-chip stocks were in a mild uptrend, the rest of the market was volatile, but within expected boundaries. CA was the only stock showing significant upward movement, still far from its listed price. It seemed there was profit-taking from those who bought low. I texted a team member at JP Morgan, who admitted they had managed to offload about half of the stock at 50 cents on the dollar. My former boss, John Ratty, told me to hold the rest and wait, as the trend looked positive. We both laughed, and he hinted that JP Morgan might want to rehire me and fire Rage. That night, I grabbed a spare blanket and slept on the fold-out couch in my office. The next morning, I checked the closing prices on SGX again and was pleasantly surprised to see CA had closed at $13.02. The trend continued as predicted, and our investors had doubled their money. If we managed to reach the predicted $25, we would make over 300% profit. I made breakfast and called the kids to eat while I drank coffee, completely ignoring Alice. After dropping the kids off at school, I headed to the gym and then went to IHOP for a very late breakfast. I made some calls and, when I got home, had a 2-hour meeting with Charles. We talked about starting a combined brokerage firm with offices in Springfield and Chicago. We discussed the idea and agreed he would start working on the structure and equity in the new business, while I developed a plan to go to market. I was drafting the document until late afternoon when Alice came in. I left Kathy and Liam at the Beckers for the night, she informed me. We need to talk. She invited me into the living room and poured me a bourbon on the rocks, herself a glass of wine. I sat down waiting for her to begin. Usually whoever starts talking first loses, so I sat in silence, sipping my drink until she finally broke. I don't know what you think I've been doing while you've been away, Matthew, she began. I haven't thought about anything yet, I replied. Well, you're being very disrespectful and ugly to me, she said, trying to hold back tears. Is that how you feel? I asked, raising an eyebrow. Disrespectful. She started to nod but realized her hypocrisy and stopped. I'm sorry, Matthew. You're not home anymore. We're like two strangers. After 17 years, we're strangers because I've been gone for 4 months? All the Skypes, texts, and phone calls didn't matter? I asked, feeling a mix of anger and confusion. There was a lot of pressure on me, and you were far away, she said, wiping tears from her eyes. But you're my husband, and I'm your wife, and that's all that matters, she added, her eyes daring me to contradict her. She stood up and withdrew. I sat there, sipping my bourbon, wondering if this woman had lost her mind. I heard her cell phone ring, and she spoke in hushed tones. Soon, all I heard was the murmuring of water in the bathtub. It was some time before she came downstairs, dressed in a soft gray knitted dress that ended just above her knees, black shoes, and a single string of pearls I had bought her in the Far East a few years ago. Go take a shower and get dressed, she told me. I'll make a reservation at the Chesapeake Seafood Restaurant. I was ready in 15 minutes, dressed with a feeling that she was on the phone with someone again. Ignoring my instincts, I bit my tongue. We drove to the restaurant, where she started with a gin and tonic in the lounge. Since Alice had discovered gin, I deliberately beat her to it by ordering a Singapore sling. Later in the dining room, she ordered a hot pot of mussels, and I had half a dozen oysters on the half shell to start. We drank Chardonnay and talked about the kids. She didn't seem very concerned about me losing my job. "You're one of the smartest people I know, Matthew. I believe you'll find a job quickly." She smiled at me, apparently oblivious to the fact that I was now a pariah in the corporate world. "Anyway, our savings will help us get by until you get settled." I almost snorted with laughter and concern. She had no idea that our entire future now depended on my stubborn unwillingness to admit I was wrong about CA. Nevertheless, the evening improved as we discussed friends, parents, and the usual everyday topics that form the foundation of any marriage. She asked about some of my former co-workers she had met at company parties. I avoided talking about MRE until I had more information. When our main courses arrived, I had the captain's platter, and she had the lobster. She treated me to wine, and I drank it, wondering if she was trying to get me drunk. If that was her intention, she succeeded. The evening passed smoothly, and we enjoyed each other's company. If she was cheating on me, she did an impeccable job of showing me how much she missed me. She caressed my hand, looked into my eyes, and was completely attentive. We finished our meal and headed home. The next morning, I woke up to the smell of coffee and bacon. I pulled on my sweatpants and went downstairs. Alice was making scrambled eggs, bacon, and English muffins in the toaster. Apple juice was on the table, and coffee was brewing. We ate breakfast together, and she talked about the things that needed to be done around the house and in the backyard. After breakfast, she got dressed and left to pick up Liam and Kathy. I was in the backyard preparing to start some cleanup after the winter when my phone rang. It was Leonard Cooper. "Can you talk?" he asked, and my life turned upside down. We arranged to meet at a coffee shop downtown. Leaving my work unfinished, I cleaned up and headed out. He was already there when I arrived and waved me over. Leonard was nothing like I expected. He was a small, unassuming man, no more than 5 to 7 inches or 5 and 8, thin with gray hair and balding. His appearance was plain, but he wasn't light-skinned. He wore dark pants, a shirt, and an old sports jacket. Even his shoes looked like they were bought at Walmart. Overall, he seemed like a nobody, probably driving a Toyota. However, his high-end cell phone didn't match his outward image, and I inwardly smiled, realizing he had cultivated an unremarkable persona. His firm handshake further confirmed my impression of his hidden depth. He got straight to the point. "Let's not beat around the bush, Mr. Blake. We didn't catch your wife at a hotel or in any secret meetings," he said, holding up a hand to stop me from interrupting. "But we have ample corroborating evidence that she's been having an affair with her boss, Nicholas Wright, for at least 2 years. This seems to be an open secret at the office. His daughter Isabella knows about it, and not only condones it, but facilitates it in every way possible. They met regularly during the week, and when you weren't home, she would often leave the children with friends and stay with him for the weekend." His words hit me like a sledgehammer. My pulse quickened, and my hands clutched the table as if I were having a heart attack. It's one thing to suspect your wife is cheating, but another to have it confirmed by a near stranger. Leonard continued, but I could barely hear him over the blood rushing in my ears. "Mr. Wright has been diagnosed with a very aggressive pancreatic cancer," he said. "He only has a few months to live." "What?" I tried to process the information. "Wright has metastatic pancreatic cancer. He's now undergoing therapy for the second time, but it doesn't seem to be working," Leonard repeated. This confirmed what Derek had hinted at and what I had discovered, but I didn't realize the cancer was incurable. It all made sense now. Alice's behavior, her state of mind. She was in pain because she was mourning the man she loved, trying to come to terms with his impending death. I told Leonard about Alice's behavior and how it all connected, not because he was my friend or confidant, but because I needed someone to talk to. Leonard's response confirmed my initial impression of his hidden depth. Many cheaters try to minimize their actions by saying it was just sex or that it meant nothing. "But that's nonsense, Mr. Blake," he said, taking a sip of his coffee and grimacing at the cold taste. "Cheaters don't just have sex. They invest in each other and the relationship. Women need to feel loved. No one has a long-term affair just for sex. It may start that way, but feelings emerge. They develop a personal language, share hopes and dreams, and often lament that their illicit relationship isn't their permanent one. They find faults in their spouse to justify their cheating. I was shocked and devastated. I understood all that, but hearing it so bluntly hurt more than I expected. My wife was in a relationship with another man who gave her all the same things I did, but without the burdens of everyday life. She gave him all her attention, and he provided the good times without the daily drudgery of marriage. They shared experiences that would never become routine. We talked some more and agreed to pause the investigation while I considered my next steps. Leonard left, and I was left to ponder my life. One thing was clear: my marriage was over. The delusional reasoning of staying together for the children's sake was beyond me. As unpleasant as the thought of being separated from my children was, the reality was that 60% of children in the U.S. live in separated or divorced families anyway. Mine would be no different. I sipped my rapidly cooling coffee, feeling the pain coursing through my insides. The raw, emotional turmoil was almost unbearable, and I knew it would take its toll on Alice and Wright. I did my best to muffle my emotions. These angry, hurt, anguished, and somewhat irrational thoughts wouldn't help me. I thought back to my work in the Far East, where I had encountered many old-school executives who viewed business and life in multi-generational terms. They behaved much like Southern Europeans when two families went to war. There was no reprieve until one of them was completely wiped out. Easier said than done. I wasn't the head of a triad or a godfather in the mafia. I was just an ordinary man living a fairly ordinary life. I didn't have any superpowers, nor did I have some omnipotent ally who owed me a great deal. The only certainty was that I was in this alone. I ordered another coffee and pondered how to exact revenge on a dying man. Alice's situation was simpler. Take away everything she loved and treasured. Easier said than done, but a plan was already forming in my mind. My immediate problem was Wright. He had made no promises of fidelity to me. He wasn't married to me. He was married to Alice. Yet he knew she was married and pursued her anyway, thus disrespecting me, my marriage, and my children. My anger, fueled by pain, began to flare up again. All my early psychological evaluations at work revealed two traits that needed to be monitored and managed. I was risk-averse, which could be a double-edged sword in a conservative company, and I was stubborn to the point of becoming intransigent. These traits were driving me now. I retaliated regardless of the consequences, and would not back down until one side was defeated, even if that side was me. A rough plan began to take shape in my head. I called Leonard and, without going into detail, asked him to find as many troubled women as possible who had been helped by the Rights program. It wasn't a fully formed plan. It was mostly just another fishing trip, but I hoped to catch something big. In 2014, I was transferred to our Kenya branch for 3 weeks, and on a free weekend, I joined a local team for some deep-sea sport fishing in the Indian Ocean. There, I learned valuable lessons. You don't go fishing for marlin first. You fish trolling with brightly colored bonito spoons, the local name for a small tuna known in the U.S. as false albacore and in Hawaii as kawakawa. You lure the live musky fish toward you, then thread a line through it, bait hooks along the length of its body, and catch a marlin using it as live bait. On that trip, I was both successful and saddened to see a marlin fighting for its life, and vowed that it would be my only attempt at big game fishing. But the lesson learned from catching the marlin gave me a plan. I drove home, doing breathing exercises until I calmed down and could pretend I was in the same mood as before. Alice still wasn't home, so I went about the business I had left undone. Later, she came back with Liam and Kathy, and we fired up the grill and cooked steaks, corn on the cob, kale, and warmed baguettes. I spent the day as an active father and a dutiful husband, masking my inner turmoil. I was two people living in one body, a warm, loving man on the outside and a cynical bastard on the inside. Cynical Matthew decided that since her lover was dying and she feared I might put two and two together, she was trying to do damage control. I was clearly her backup plan. My time with Liam and Kathy was genuine, but my interactions with Alice felt scripted, like a B-movie. She genuinely believed it, but cynical Matthew told me to remember this during the divorce when looking for women to hook up with. The next few days turned into a strange existence where I was simultaneously living a lie and watching myself play a role. I wondered if movie and TV actors felt the same, watching themselves on screen. On a positive note, Charles and I finalized the new trading organization, registered it in Singapore, and transferred the entire CA portfolio there. But that wasn't the only good news. CA was trading at $16, 30 after the roller coaster ride to market and was climbing steadily. We had already more than doubled our investment and were looking at a threefold return. Given how easily I had slipped into my psychopathic persona, I became paranoid. I added significant security measures, requiring a fingerprint and password, and encrypted all my files and emails. I always turned off my laptop and completely deleted all non-essential emails, only keeping those from Charles. Then I uploaded everything to the cloud, reformatted my phone, and re-uploaded only what was necessary. All that was left was to research other promising stock listings and call potential investors I knew from JP Morgan, anticipating an offer to buy some of their business. The non-compete clause was the least of my worries, as my layoff had rendered it mostly invalid. The marriage front went quiet while I waited for the ammunition to arrive. It came on Thursday in the form of a flash drive from Leonard. We met at a different coffee shop this time, my paranoia at an all-time high for no particular reason. Leonard had compiled a list of 14 women, including brief biographies and some old photos. 5 still lived in the area. 1 worked as an escort, a prostitute to be exact, so Wright's intervention hadn't helped her much. She had a phone number listed. I bought a burner phone and called her, arranging to meet at a motel on the outskirts of town. She said an hour was $100, and I would have to pay for the room. She arrived on time, at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. She was small, thin, and heavily tattooed. Her name was Ellie, and she stood in the doorway. "Show me the money," were her first words. I pulled $200 out of my pocket, placed the bills on the bed, and gestured for her to sit down. I raised my hand to stop her. "How do you feel about making $1,000?" I asked. She jumped up, grabbing her bag. "I don't do weird stuff, mister," she said, eyeing me warily. "No," I assured her. "I'll pay for information, that's all." "What kind of information?" she asked, curiosity piqued. "I want to know about the home for abused and vulnerable women you were in a few years ago," I replied. She hesitated but eventually agreed, recounting her story briefly. She had left home as soon as she graduated because she hated her stepfather and ended up on the streets. Eventually, having lost all hope, she began selling herself for food and lodging. One John, when she refused to do what he wanted, threw her out on the street like trash. Passers-by found her, called the police, and she was taken to the hospital. Someone contacted Mrs. Wright, who offered her a place in the house once she was discharged. She stayed there for almost 6 months until the rules and regulations bored her, and she left. When she finished her story, we looked at each other in silence for a while. Her story was typical, though no less tragic. I wondered if what I was about to do would be just another case of exploitation, but my need for revenge overpowered any moral reservations. "So, when you lived in this house, were you bullied right away, or did it start later?" I asked. She blinked rapidly, trying to comprehend my question. She started to shake her head no, then froze. I could see the gears turning in her head. "How much?" she asked. 20,000, I said, testing her reaction. She smiled grimly, watching me like a hawk. "Make it 25, and I'll show you the power of the Me Too movement in action." We negotiated, and I promised her the money if she followed through. She told me she wanted the money to get a fresh start elsewhere since she had a little girl and needed to get out of the business. I offered to help her find a job in Chicago if everything worked out, and her eyes lit up. "Really? You're not tricking me just to get what you want?" she asked, looking both hopeful and scared. I reassured her that everything would be fine. We agreed she would do what she promised, and we would meet to discuss the next steps as soon as she was ready. We exchanged numbers, and I gave her mine to save under Jerry. I left, phase 1 complete. At home, I continued my dual existence. Alice seemed to buy into my facade, focused as she was on the Wright legacy project. I gathered as much information as I could without raising her suspicions. We cooked and ate together like old times. During breakfast, she mentioned she'd be busy helping set up New Horizons House, which was having a grand opening on Monday at 10 o'clock. I already knew about it from the company website and social media. She said the mayor and his entourage would be cutting the ribbon, and a whole bunch of local media, including CBS, would be there. Did they stop the chemo and radiation so Tony could feel well enough to attend? I heard her ask, probably to Isabella. I didn't hear the answer. It's going to be a life-changing moment, she sobbed slightly. Not if I had anything to do with it. It was time to turn up the heat. My divorce papers were ready. All that remained was to get permission to file them. Illinois was a no-fault state, and there were no laws allowing me to sue Wright for alienation of affection. So it was a matter of irreconcilable differences. I started the day on SGX. Our stock had reached its issue price and was rising, albeit in small increments. A good start to Friday. I had a coffee and tuned into WMA radio. At 9:30, there was an interview with Isabella. She talked about the wonderful social responsibility program Em and her father, Nicholas Wright, had been up to. It was soulful stuff, like chicken soup for the soul. She explained that New Horizons House was an evolution of a program her mother started, and after her mother's death, her father continued. Now, there was an opportunity to turn it into a full-fledged project with full funding, but it would work better with community participation and donations. The host was enthusiastic about the project's value and asked listeners for their opinions. Many spoke favorably and some promised to donate. The presenter promised to put donation information on the WMA homepage, and Isabella said there were details on the Em and New Horizons websites. More calls followed until, "Hello?" The voice on the other end was hesitant. She was urged to speak louder, and between broken sobs she managed to say, "Please, please don't believe the house helped anyone. All it did was allow Mr. Wright to abuse women." She burst into tears over the phone. Isabella went into an apoplectic fit. "Never! This never happened. My father is a good man. He would never do anything like this." The caller was still on the line. "He did, and more than once." Her voice rose with justifiable indignation and anger. "Do you know what I am now? I work the streets. That's all I'm worth thanks to your precious daddy." Her pain was palpable. "My name is Ellie, and your father ruined me," she sobbed, and the connection cut off. The station went into a commercial break. When they returned, the anchor was torn between continuing the original interview and addressing the elephant in the room. Isabella was stunned and tried to explain it was nonsense, that her father was a good man who would never do anything like this. It was obvious she believed it, but we all want to believe the best about our parents. The lines were ringing with people both scolding and praising Ellie. One caller said, "She's clearly trying to make a buck." Others wanted to ask Isabella questions or suggested that authorities should intervene. The talk show host was no fool. A low-interest story had turned into an emotional maelstrom. The furor reached its climax when another caller spoke. "My name is Rita. I don't want to give my last name on the air." Her voice was shaky but determined. "But I left it with your producer so I can be contacted." She took a shuddering breath. "Nicholas Wright abused me too." The remarks took off in different directions. A listener called WTX to discuss what was happening on WMA. In minutes, the lines were filled with pro and con voices. A short time later, a woman called in, her voice thin and frightened. "I'm a married woman with children," she cried. "I hope to put all this behind me, but Mr. Wright has been harassing me too." She broke down and sobbed on air. "I'm so sorry. I promised I wouldn't say anything, but I can't live with this. I was young and needed help, and he made me do things. I couldn't say no. I didn't know how." She disconnected. There was a long silence before the host could speak. It sounded like he was crying. I called Daisy, an old high school friend who worked at the local newspaper and anchored the news for 2 regional radio stations. She had heard about what was going on at WMA and WTX. I told her I was concerned because my wife worked for Em in the New Horizon Home Project and asked for her opinion. She wasn't sure, but said she would look into it. If it was true, it would be the biggest abuse case in Springfield in 2 generations. By lunchtime, the story had quieted on the air. None of the radio hosts wanted to offer an opinion, but social media, especially Twitter, went wild. At first, opinions were split 50-50ths, but within hours, it turned into a fierce witch hunt. Hundreds, then thousands of women took to the platforms to tell their stories of abuse. Some were detailed, others were mere admissions of "me too." Some were so graphic they could be categorized as X-rated. Within hours, it was impossible to distinguish truth from nonsense. The information went viral, spreading not only across states but entire continents. I passed out with a massive headache. The day was early, and the kids were still in school. From the stress and emotions, I was sweating and feeling dirty. I undressed in the laundry room, walked naked to the shower, and collapsed under the warm water. I sat down and cried harder than I had since my mom died. Losing her was a knife to my heart, but this felt like a knife to my soul. I had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. The saying that he who fights monsters must be careful not to become one himself accurately described me. Wright had done terrible things, but I had unleashed a firestorm that was already out of control. All I could do now was hang on and pray. I picked up Liam and Kathy, drove home, and made chicken stir-fry with noodles and a small oriental salad. We waited for Alice, but she didn't come. I tried calling her, but her phone was off. We finally ate, and I put a plate of food for Alice in the microwave and a small bowl of salad in the refrigerator. Liam, Megan, and I played the Forbidden Island board game. By 10 p.m., the kids had gone to their bedrooms, and I was alone in the living room when she came in. She looked like she'd been through the ringer. Shadows under her eyes, hair a mess. She had the aura of a woman whose world had just crumbled. "You heard," she sighed, shuddering. "Have you heard all the nasty things they say about Tony?" She groaned, collapsing into a chair. I handed her a large brandy, which she gratefully accepted, drinking half of it in one gulp. "Yeah, sounds like your boss is a predator," I told her in an even, emotionless voice. "Where there's smoke, there's fire." "No, Matthew, he's a good man. He would never do anything like this. Time to get to phase 2. "Alice," I said, looking her in the eye, "you obviously didn't know the man very well. You don't know me either." "What are you talking about?" she asked, confused. "We're husband and wife, Alice. No secrets, right? Just like I know you, you know me. You may know Wright as your boss, but who knows what he's really like?" Her face showed conflicting thoughts and emotions. No, he's a good man. He would never do anything like that. I would know," she insisted. "But how can you be sure? He's your boss, your coworker. He could be hiding a million secrets," I said, pretending to be puzzled. "He's the kind of guy you wouldn't leave alone with your wife or daughters." She sighed. "He's never tried anything with me, if that's what you're asking. Because you're a pretty woman, Alice, and if what they say about him is true, he must be very immoral." She burst into tears, looking deeply into her glass of brandy but finding no answers. She finished it and headed upstairs. I heard the shower running. I finished my cognac and headed to bed. By the time she got out of the shower, I pretended to be half asleep. She came downstairs in her robe. I climbed out of bed and made my way to the landing. She was talking to someone, probably Isabella, repeating the word nightmare several times. Finally, she asked, "But why? Why isn't there more than one woman saying she was attacked?" She didn't think it would go away easily. How right she was. She made a second call. "Hi, Tony," I heard her say. I caught snippets of phrases where she kept telling him that everything would be resolved, and it was some big misunderstanding. I barely heard her move to the kitchen, but I caught her last words. "I love you too." I heard the microwave beep, and she spent some time alone, probably snacking. By the time she got to bed, I was asleep. Saturday, I woke up first, made breakfast, and then drove Liam and Kathy to sports practice. When I got home, I was on the phone with Daisy. She informed me that another woman had come forward, making a total of 4 so far. She also said her sources in the mayor's office indicated that the entire project was now considered toxic, and they were distancing themselves from it. Several civic associations followed suit, issuing denials. By mid-morning, the Attorney General's office had issued a statement that they would conduct a full investigation into the matter. By the time I got home, the SGX exchange was closed, so there was nothing to do. I talked to Charles about business and to my father about the state of my marriage. He agreed it was irretrievably broken. He felt sorry for Liam and Kathy, but like the rest of the kids in the U.S., they would learn to cope. I called Alice. "Where are you?" "Isabella and I and the company lawyers are trying to fight these nasty lawsuits. Are you sure you should get involved?" I colored my voice with concern. "The spillover could be significant and you don't want to be in it." She resisted, as I knew she would, but all their lawyerly entreaties went nowhere. On Saturday afternoon and Sunday, the busiest days of the show, M had less than 20% of its previous attendance. By Monday morning, the phones were ringing off the hook with calls of canceled and withdrawn sales orders. The opening of the New Horizons home was postponed until the negative publicity was over. On Monday, another woman made herself known in an unusual way. She was married to a wealthy businessman and was well known in the community. According to her, she spent a total of 8 days in the house before she gave them her name, and they contacted her parents. During that time, the man she knew as Mr. Right abused her twice. She left her lawyer's details for all the women who had been assaulted by Wright to contact him so they could file a class action lawsuit. By the end of that week, 5 things had happened. First, Wright was interviewed by the district attorney at the hospital, after which his condition deteriorated. Second, 3 of the 5 women went to the police and testified, claiming they had been assaulted within a short period about 5 years ago. Third, the media storm escalated, forcing M to close its doors until further notice. Alice naively told me every night about how Isabella was trying to keep the business going while vendors were leaving and taking customers with them. Fourth, California had passed the $24 mark, and I was slowly selling blocks of shares, which were quickly snapped up without lowering the price. We made back our original investment and still owned 2/3 of the stock. To put it bluntly, we sat back in complete delight. My dad took Liam and Kathy out for the weekend. On my way back from a small boutique, I bought a chilled bottle of 2012 vintage Veuve Clicquot, ready to celebrate with Alice. Number 5, I noticed a BMW X5 SUV with the M logo on the doors parked in my driveway next to Alice's Lexus. I stopped and walked into the house. They were in the living room. Alice was crying, and Isabella was stroking her back, trying to calm her down. "Ladies," I greeted them, walking over to the cabinet where our crystal was kept. I pulled out 3 champagne flutes. They stared at me, dumbfounded, as I tore off the foil, twisted the wire to remove the cage, and popped the cork. I filled 3 glasses and handed them each one. They were both in a stupor, accepting the glasses without a word. "Salute," I toasted, drank half of mine and burped. Then the shouting began. "Alice, you're divorcing me. I thought we were a family," I said, noticing an open envelope with the divorce papers on the coffee table. "Matthew, don't you care about your wife? Don't you love her?" Isabella asked. "Have a drink, Alice. We're celebrating the end of an era," I said, finishing the rest of the champagne and reaching for the bottle. "Hello, Isabella. First of all, I could, and I did. Second, I stopped caring about her and stopped loving her when she became your father's." Isabella dropped her glass, spilling champagne on the carpet. They looked at me as if I were a madman with his finger on the trigger. "You left me alone for so long and so often. I needed human contact." Alice tried to justify herself, but couldn't meet my gaze. "I understand," I laughed humorlessly. "And how do you manage that now?" Isabella jumped in again. "And how many women did you sleep with while you were away from home? You men all want your women to be angels, while you do whatever you want. Not all men act like the piece of garbage who gave birth to you. Just because he was happy to ruin young women and marriages doesn't mean the rest of us stoop to his depravity," I said, leaning into her face. "Your father is a molester, a criminal, a disgusting pig. He'll probably die before he goes to prison, but you, my wife, and the world will recognize him for what he is. His legacy project will never take off, and his money will be frozen by the courts against future lawsuits by his victims. M will file for bankruptcy and cease to exist, and you'll have to move far away and change your name." She trembled and cried at my verbal assault. I bet she wished she was a man to hit me. I wished she was a man too, so I could unleash the rage I'd so carefully contained for the last few weeks. "Isabella, you probably helped woo these girls the way Ghislaine Maxwell did for Jeffrey Epstein." Her mouth worked wordlessly at the horror I was spouting. "I think I need to contact the news media to let them know about you," I added. "No, please. I didn't do this. It's all a lie, some kind of mistake. I don't know what these women are trying to accomplish, but it's not true. My father is a good man." I turned to Alice. "You have 2 hours to gather your clothes and leave. If you're still here when I return, I'll call the press and make a statement. Moreover, I will invite them to interview you about your involvement in this horrible crime." "Screw you," she spat at me. "I have nothing to apologize for except for cheating and lying. I'll move out, but I'll hire a lawyer first thing and then we'll see who gets what." "Oh God, Alice," I sighed. 2 hours, I promised her. I got out and headed for the car, but had only gone a few blocks when the unused adrenaline in my body caught up with me, and I gasped and shook. This went on for about 15 minutes before I got my body under control and was able to move on. I drove aimlessly around the city, eventually pulling myself together and calling my father. I told him about Alice's handing over the papers and reiterated that he should keep Liam and Kathy with him until further notice. He should allow Alice to visit them, but under no circumstances should she be left alone with them to set them against me. We talked, and I drove off before the car signaled that I was on standby. I found a gas station, filled up, and headed home, marveling at how far from home I was. By the time I got back, it was 10 p.m. The house felt like a mausoleum filled with the ghosts of happy times. The silence was deafening and I couldn't sleep. Socrates once said that an unexamined life is not worth living. I lay in bed trying not to examine myself or look too deeply into my psyche because of the turmoil I'd created for revenge. The only thing I knew for sure was that things had gone too far, and there was no stopping it. I feared that what was happening on social media was one thing, but if it went to court, things could unravel or fall apart. Would I find myself implicated? I felt the need to get Ellie out of town to at least eliminate my direct connection to the issue. Having decided this, I managed to sink into a half slumber. When I woke up the next morning, I felt almost as tired as when I climbed into bed. After my morning rituals, I headed downtown to get some breakfast. I called the kids, they were doing well, but Liam already suspected that all was not well at home. I promised I'd talk to him and Megan soon. Over a cup of coffee, I reached Ellie on the landline. "So did I do as well as I promised?" she asked. I admitted that she had. We talked and confirmed that she was flying to Chicago the next day. I had already transferred money from my offshore trading account to one of Charles's offshore accounts. Then he had transferred small amounts to a bank account she had opened. Ellie was now $25,000 richer and off to a job as a property management assistant, organized by one of Charles's investment contacts who owned several commercial properties. I was drinking my second cup of coffee when Daisy called. "3 women have sued Wright, seeking damages," she informed me. "The papers will be served on Monday." We talked for a while, and she said she and the news editors were surprised by the timing and how the whole story had unfolded, but she reasoned that it wasn't surprising in the current climate. Once the first woman, Ellie, who claimed she was a prostitute, got publicity, the rest followed, as in the case of Harvey Weinstein. I spent the rest of Saturday with Liam and Kathy. I told them that their mom and I were getting a divorce because she was having an affair with her boss, Nicholas Wright. Kathy didn't quite understand what an affair was, but Liam did. "She slept with Mr. Wright, Dad?" he asked. I nodded sadly. "Yeah, they've been sleeping together for a while now." Kathy cried, but Liam was unfazed. We packed up and took my dad with us to the golf course, hitting a few buckets of balls. Liam and Kathy used some of my old clubs, and both had a good natural swing. After dinner, we went to a Greek restaurant and eventually headed to bed. I returned to my quiet house and had another sleepless night. On Sunday, I got a call from Alice's parents. They wanted to know if there was any hope of reconciliation for the sake of the children. "How can I reconcile with a woman who has been having an affair with her boss for years?" I asked. "And that boss happens to be a maniac. Alice may have even had a part in it." There was a collective sigh. Living in Arizona had sheltered them from the bombshell that had hit Illinois. "It will all be figured out in court," I assured them, leaving them with a shattered view of their daughter. Life went on, mostly slowly and painfully. Liam and Megan moved back into my home, and my father moved in to help out. This left me with a business that was gaining momentum, as Charles and I were getting lots of positive feedback. At the end of the second week, the hype around Wright had died down somewhat. Daisy informed me that a 4th woman had joined the class action lawsuit against Wright, but not Ellie. I found that odd. She was edgy enough and seemed mercurial enough to get her piece of the pie. Oh well, that was a mystery for another day. I had a meeting between Alice's lawyers and mine about the division of property. I had set up investment accounts for Liam and Kathy's education out of our combined cash or near-cash assets, so they couldn't be touched. My last paycheck and payments from J.P. Morgan went directly into my offshore account, and her lawyers were still trying to get documents from my previous employer. While they suspected there was some sort of golden handshake, they had no idea how much. It was only a matter of time before they subpoenaed the HR documents. I offered to pay her nothing, as she had a job and was making a good living. She argued that there should have been at least $250,000 in cash and near assets. I assured them that they had been lost on unprofitable stocks. Both Alice and her lawyer called, but I laughed. "Take the deal, Alice, or I'll take your house payment down and we'll fight over it until you run out of money for lawyers. I'll ruin you financially." Why? Why are you being such an ass? She asked. I deserve half of whatever is left of our marriage. Go to your second husband and ask him for money, Alice. It sounds like you had more of a marriage with him than you did with me, but you'd better hurry. He may not have any money left after those poor assaulted women get what he owes them. I wish I could say it was all over after that, but it wasn't. It dragged on for months. Most of the cards were in my hands, and righteous anger kept me going. She hesitated from meeting to meeting. At one, she claimed I made the whole relationship between her and Wright look much more serious than it was. At the next, she blamed me for her behavior. Then she wanted to know why we had to get a divorce, and why we couldn't work it out. The next time, she threatened to take me to the cleaners. At another meeting, her lawyer said he would get her back in the house immediately. I grinned and warned her, "You'd better be careful around me, Alice, or I will go to every possible media outlet to expose your complicity in this." She turned white, and then gray, like a heart attack victim. "Try it and see what happens to you next," she spat. As I left the lawyer's office, I noticed Isabella sitting in the foyer glaring at me angrily. I smiled at her the way one smiles at the walking dead, and her smile faltered and faded. "You should have stayed out of this, Isabella. Well, what you sow is what you reap." 2 days later, Ellie was another $5,000 richer, and the local newspapers, Twitter, and social media were ablaze with the latest revelations that Isabella Wright had been helping her disgraced father, Nicholas Wright. The DA's office came under fire for not arresting Wright or taking action against his daughter. The DA's office stated that they were still in the early stages of the investigation. The press didn't hold back, and another storm erupted. The public, still reeling from the story of Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein, soon turned its bloodlust on Isabella Wright as well. Wright was sued by 4 highly publicized women. I became seriously concerned, having sleepless nights, fearing that going to court could derail the whole case. 6 weeks after my return from Singapore, I was working from home when the doorbell rang. It was Isabella. "What do you need?" I asked, not pretending. "Can we talk, Matthew?" "No, I don't want to be associated with a predator like you," I said, glaring at her and closing the door. She called again, just as I knew she would. "Please, Matthew, just talk," she begged. I felt like laughing out loud. "Where's your entitlement?" I asked. "I don't think so. You just want to record me and try to get me to say something you can use." "I won't, I promise," she said, her eyes lighting up with hope. "Good," I said, holding out my hand. "But first, put your purse and phone in the car." She did as instructed. I set my phone to record and let her in. "Okay, talk," I said, motioning for her to sit. She looked unsure but sat on the edge of the couch. "I know it's you, Matthew. You're the one who created this whole nightmare." I stared at her without emotion. "Stop it. Stop it now, Matthew." I remained silent, and she changed the subject. "I know you were hurt by Alice's affair with my father, but this nonsense about my father abusing women is a lie. It needs to stop." I laughed in her face. "There's nothing I can do, Isabella. It's up to the court now. Please, Matthew, please make it stop. I know you can." I smiled unhappily. "Now that your world has collapsed, you want my help? Where were you when your father was entertaining my wife?" Her face turned red again. "Oh yes, you were helping, making sure she agreed to be your father's toy." We stared at each other in silence. Finally she said, "What will satisfy you, Matthew? Will you be happy when we're all destroyed?" "Not until your family is completely ruined, Isabella." She shuddered, her eyes widening in horror. "There will be no stopping. There will be no ceasefire. There will be no peace," I spoke slowly, letting her realize this was real. She fell silent, contemplating my words. Then she surprised me by trying again. "You want revenge, Matthew. How can I make it right?" Her eyes were cloudy with tears, her voice shaky. She was in her early 30s, unmarried, with no children. Her Facebook pages indicated a recent breakup with her last partner. I watched her drive unevenly down the street. I had conflicting feelings of satisfaction at causing her pain and disgust at my own cruelty. The rest of the week was a blur of law offices and new clients. Charles and I were completing due diligence on a small IT company listed on the Hong Kong Stock Exchange and a natural gas exploration company on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. The class action lawsuit against Wright was in full swing. The Wrights, led by Isabella, were trying to reach an out-of-court settlement. The DA was hesitant to prosecute a man on his deathbed. We all waited with bated breath. The rights were cleaned out of almost every penny. All real estate owned by the company was sold, and the women received over $2 million each. The amount was undisclosed, but it was huge. It was the end of MRE. I needed one more thing to complete my revenge. I went to the hospital and entered Wright's room, looking official and walking as if I belonged. No one challenged me. I was there to make sure he knew who had ruined him. He lived for 2 more days. Isabella had him cremated, and there were only 5 people at the small gathering, one of them being Alice. She wanted to take Liam and Kathy with her. I would see you dead first, I told her. You would, wouldn't you? She replied, a mixture of fear and hatred in her eyes. You ruined him, didn't you? For what? Because he and I had a relationship. You went crazy and ruined so many lives, she cried. You're the one who planted the seeds, Alice. Why didn't you just tell me you wanted someone else? We could have gotten a divorce, but you chose to neglect me. That was unacceptable. I love Tony, she admitted quietly. He gave me what I needed. With you, I always felt like your job came first and I came second. Then when we had Liam and Megan, I wasn't even in second place. It was your job, the kids, and I got whatever was left. She looked me in the eye. I needed someone to put me first. I could have walked away, but didn't. I pulled out my phone. Listen to this. Was it worth it? She heard me say. No, he wheezed. You ruined everything I worked for. I laughed harshly. It's your own fault, right? I screwed you up big time. How did you find out about me using them? He asked. I started laughing uncontrollably. I didn't know, right? I thought I was making it all up. Now I realize why those women pursued you. Screw you, Blake, he wheezed. Alice collapsed to the floor in shock. I walked away. She was no longer my problem. Epilogue. When M was liquidating assets, I bought the house they were converting into New Horizons House for next to nothing. It took effort to get all the players together, but everything fell into place. I announced that I had purchased the house and would turn it into a full-fledged shelter for abused women, run solely by women. I renamed it Joy Blake House in honor of my mother. Dad cried and kissed me, and Liam and Kathy were impressed. The house was placed in a trust with Dad, me, and the 4 women who sued Wright as trustees. They were happy to be involved and contributed some of their newfound wealth. The local and regional media called the project Phoenix and showered us with praise. It also helped me look good in front of a judge during my divorce. Alice got primary custody, but I paid no alimony. She could stay in the house until Liam and Megan turned 18, contributing 50% toward the mortgage. We eventually divorced, and I bought a 3-bedroom condo for the kids to stay with me on weekends. I missed them, especially when traveling to the Far East, but overall, life wasn't too bad. Alice's relationship with Isabella broke down after I showed her the tape of my encounter with Wright. I circulated an edited version of Wright's confession, and Isabella left town, never to be heard from again. I met Ellie in Chicago. Her real name was Eliana Parker. She had cleaned herself up and enjoyed her work. It was like an open secret, she confirmed. No one admitted to the abuse directly. Everyone was afraid. Why didn't you tell me? I asked. I had no idea, she admitted. I contacted a few women I knew and asked if they'd say they were abused for $5,000. I laughed. You could have made so much money. She shook her head. By the time they sued Wright, I was in Chicago. I had no idea what was going on. You gave me a good start, Ellie. Thank you. My revenge was complete. The Wrights were destroyed, and I learned lessons in revenge I never dreamed possible. Financially, things were looking up. Charles talked about retiring, and I was considering buying him out. Liam and Kathy adjusted to life, focusing on school, friends, and sports. Alice remarried an older man, and they lived together for a few years before marrying. Liam and Kathy said he was a nice guy. I remained single, still having trust issues. At my father's insistence, I started seeing a trauma counselor and began improving my attitude. Life went on, mostly normal but forever changed.